By the end of this video, you'll understand why advanced civilizations don't collapse from enemies. They collapse from success. Act 1. The Disturbance. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just a delay. The ships didn't arrive on Tuesday. Then they didn't arrive at all. The dock workers stood idle. The merchants screamed at the harbor masters, but there were no answers, just the empty horizon. Prices doubled, then tripled. Suddenly, bread wasn't something you bought, it was something you fought for. Then the messages stopped coming from the capital. The tax collectors disappeared. The soldiers abandoned their posts at the city gates because they hadn't been paid in months. The world was globalized, interconnected. If a king in the West sneezed, a merchant in the East went bankrupt. They had international diplomacy that rivaled the United Nations. They had complex supply chains that moved raw materials across 3 continents. They had treaties that guaranteed peace forever. They believed their system was too big to fail. They believed because they were rich, they were safe. I'm not talking about us, not yet. I'm talking about the year 1177 BC. In a span of 40 years, every major city from Greece to Egypt burned to the ground. The Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Canaanites, the Cypriots, gone. Palaces that had stood for 500 years were turned into ash in a single afternoon. Languages that had been spoken by millions vanished from the human tongue. We are taught that civilizations rise and fall slowly, that they decay over centuries like an old house. That is a lie. The most advanced system in human history didn't fade away. It wasn't murder, it was organ failure. It died because it was too efficient to survive a bad day. And the scariest part isn't that they died, it's that if you look at their economy, their trade routes, and their politics, they looked exactly like us before they did.
Act 2. The Accepted Story. To understand the murder, you have to understand the victim. Before the fire, this world was a miracle. Historians call this the Late Bronze Age, but that name makes it sound primitive. Think of it instead as the G7 of the ancient world, a club of superpowers that ran the planet. First, you had the Egyptians, the gold reserve, the breadbasket. They were the stabilizing force, the America of the region, projecting power and wealth. Second, the Hittites in modern-day Turkey, the industrial powerhouse. Their chariots were the tanks of the ancient world. Their engineering was unmatched. Third, the Babylonians, the center of culture, law, and mathematics, the intellectuals. And finally, the Mycenaeans in Greece, the shipping tycoons, the hustle culture. They were the ones moving the goods. They weren't isolated tribes throwing rocks at each other. They were writing letters to each other daily. We have found these letters. They are called the Amarna letters, and they don't sound like ancient texts. They sound like corporate emails. They complain about late shipments. They negotiate marriage alliances like mergers. They ask for doctors, sculptors, and musicians. Kings would marry into each other's families not for love, but to keep the trade routes open, to keep the bronze prices stable. It was a golden age of international trade. A merchant could sail from Italy to Israel without fear, protected by treaties signed by kings who called each other brother. Imagine a world where you could buy amber from the Baltic Sea, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and ivory from Africa in a single market stall in Crete. It was perfect, it was wealthy, it was stable. Until the lights went out. Everywhere. So, Who killed them? If you open a standard history textbook, you'll find the usual suspects. Historians have spent decades trying to pin the murder on a single villain. Suspect number 1, the Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of naval raiders, the Shardana, the Shekelesh, the Peliset. The story goes that they swept through the Mediterranean like Vikings, burning everything in their path, a wave of barbarism destroying civilization. Suspect number 2, Mother Nature. Archaeologists have found evidence of earthquake storms, a series of massive seismic events that shattered the walls of Mycenae and Troy in quick succession, followed by a decades-long mega-drought that dried up the Nile River and turned the wheat fields of Anatolia into dust. Suspect number 3, internal rebellion, the Marxist theory. The poor finally had enough of the rich living in palaces while they starved, so they rose up to eat the elite. These are the answers we accept. They feel safe. Bad guys came on boats, the earth shook, the poor revolted. It means it wasn't the system's fault. It was just bad luck. It was an external event that no one could have predicted. But there is a massive, glaring problem with the history books. Because if you look closely at the ruins, if you look at what was destroyed and how it was destroyed, you realize they weren't murdered. They failed. Act 3. The fracture. Here is the detail that doesn't fit. War has a rule. It has a logic. When an army conquers a city, they don't burn the food, they don't destroy the farms, and they certainly don't burn the palace down and then leave. They move in, they tax the people, they use the infrastructure. Invaders don't destroy wealth, they steal it. The Romans didn't burn Carthage until they had looted it. The Mongols didn't burn cities if they could tax them. But in 1177 BC, the invaders didn't settle. They burned cities to the ground and then disappeared into the same famine they supposedly caused. Why would you destroy the very thing you need to survive, unless the thing you were destroying was already broken, unless the silos were already empty before the torch was lit? The forensic evidence suggests something terrifying. Many of these cities weren't destroyed by foreign armies. They were destroyed after the food ran out. The fire didn't cause the collapse. The fire was the result of it. The Sea Peoples weren't a cause. They were a symptom. Stop looking at the armies. Stop looking at the kings. If you want to understand why the world ended, look at the metal. We call it the Bronze Age for a reason. Bronze was not just a material. It was the plastic, the steel, and the oil of the ancient world combined. You needed it for weapons to defend your borders. You needed it for tools to plow the fields. You needed it for the nails that held your ships together. Without bronze, the army collapses, the trade stops, the people starve. But here's the problem with bronze. It is an alloy. It is a mixture. To make it, you need 90% copper. That was easy. Cyprus was basically a mountain of copper sticking out of the sea. Everyone had access to copper. But you also need 10% tin, and tin is rare. In fact, in the ancient world, tin was the most dangerous resource on Earth. There was only one major source of tin capable of supplying the world machine. Here, in the Badakhshan mines of modern-day Afghanistan, thousands of miles away from Greece and Egypt. Think about the logistics of that. To make a single spear tip in Mycenae, rocks had to be mined in the mountains of Kabul. They had to be carried on donkeys through the Hindu Kush. They had to pass through the hands of warlords and middlemen in Mesopotamia. They had to be loaded on ships in Syria, and finally traded to the factories in Greece. Do you see the trap? The Egyptians had the gold, the Hittites had the muscle, the Mycenaeans had the ships, but none of them had everything. They were addicted to a resource they couldn't produce themselves. If that trade route was cut, by war, by bandits, by anything, the entire industrial capacity of the Mediterranean would grind to a halt. This brings us to the realization that historians missed for decades. We look at maps and see separate colors, separate borders, separate nations. That is an illusion. These nations weren't independent. They were organs in the same body. This wasn't a collection of civilizations. It was one body pretending to be many. And because they were one body, they shared the same immune system, which meant if one of them got sick, they all died. Act 4. The Descent. So how does the world end? It doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a glitch. Sometime around 1200 BC, the supply chain hiccuped. Maybe it was a bad harvest in Anatolia. Maybe a small war closed a trade route in the Zagros Mountains. Maybe the Assyrians expanded just a little too far west, cutting the tin lines. In a normal world, this is an inconvenience. In a hyper-connected world, it is a death sentence. The tin stops flowing. Suddenly, the king of Mycenae can't repair his army's weapons. The farmers can't replace their broken plows. Food production drops. The price of grain skyrockets. And this is where the psychology of collapse kicks in. This is the moment the social contract breaks. When resources get tight, international cooperation evaporates. The kings who called each other brother stopped answering letters. They started hoarding. Egypt closed its borders. The Hittites embargoed their neighbors to keep their own people fed. The global system shattered into 1,000 desperate lifeboats, all fighting over the same shrinking ocean. We actually have the black box recording of this crash. In the ruins of the city of Ugarit, archaeologists found a clay tablet. It was found inside a kiln. That means it was written, put in the oven to bake, and never taken out. The city was destroyed before the message could be sent. It reads, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Luca? The country is abandoned to itself." That is the sound of a king realizing he is alone. Here is the most uncomfortable part of this story. We blamed the sea peoples for destroying civilization, but look at who they were. They weren't an organized army. They traveled with their wives, their children, their household goods in ox carts. Soldiers don't bring their families to a war. Refugees do. The sea peoples weren't the villains. They were the victims. They were the people from the first cities to fall, starving, terrified, and armed, moving south to find food. They didn't destroy the system. They were the debris created by the broken system. But when they arrived at the gates of Egypt or Ugarit, the locals didn't see refugees. They saw an invasion. And so, the wars began. Not for conquest, but for bread. Systems theorists call this hypercoherence. When a system becomes too efficient, it loses its ability to handle failure. The Bronze Age kings had optimized their world for wealth, for trade, for growth. They squeezed every ounce of inefficiency out of the loop, but they had zero redundancy for disaster. They built a race car that could go 200 miles per hour, but they forgot to install the brakes. So when one tire blew out, the whole car didn't just stop, it disintegrated. The end came fast, faster than anyone believed possible. The trade routes died, the economy collapsed, the starving populations burned their own palaces to find grain. The refugees overwhelmed the survivors. It wasn't a slow decline. From the first glitch to total darkness, it took less than one human lifetime. 40 years. That's it. One generation grew up in the most advanced civilization on Earth. Their children grew up in the ruins, fighting off wolves. By 1177 BC, the music had stopped. The writing systems were forgotten. The techniques for masonry were lost. The international trade routes were buried under sand. Humanity slid back into a dark age that would last for 300 years. They had everything, and then they had nothing.
Act 5. The Mirror. It is easy to look at the Bronze Age and think they were primitive. We look at their chariots and clay tablets and we feel superior. We have the internet, we have global banking, we have safeguards, we have AI. But strip away the technology and the structure of our world is identical to theirs. They relied on tin from a single region to keep their economy running. We rely on silicon chips from a single island to keep ours running. If the factories in Taiwan stop tomorrow, the global economy halts in 48 hours. No new cars, no new phones, no medical equipment. They had a climate crisis that pushed millions of desperate people toward the borders of wealthy nations. Does that sound familiar? They had a financial system so interconnected that a debt crisis in one city crashed the economy of another. We built the exact same machine. We just made it faster and more fragile. We call our complexity progress, but systems theorists have a different name for it. They call it a critical state. We have removed all the slack from the system to maximize efficiency. We don't have warehouses anymore. We have just-in-time delivery. We don't have local food security. We have global logistics. It works perfectly. It creates massive wealth until the moment it doesn't. We saw it in 2020. One virus closed one port in China, and suddenly you couldn't buy a refrigerator in Chicago. Grocery shelves in London went empty in 3 days. That was just a tremor. That wasn't the earthquake. We live inside the miracle just like they did, and miracles feel permanent until the day they vanish. We assume the water will always flow, that the lights will always turn on, that the grocery stores will always be full. We assume this is permanent. We assume someone is flying the plane. But remember this, no one in 1177 BC thought they were living at the end of an era either. They thought the system was too big to fail. They were wrong. Civilizations don't collapse because of monsters. They collapse when the story that holds them together breaks. The story of the Bronze Age was that trade brings peace. That story died in 10 years. The story of our age is that technology saves us. The question isn't whether it will happen again. The question is, if the supply chain broke tomorrow, how long would your city last?